Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas.
And we post a video every week. So why not subscribe and press the alert button so you can keep up with what we're doing.
Indeed. And if you have a burning horticultural question for our in-house horticulturalist, Mr. Ryan, leave it in the comments below and do say where you're from in the world and Mr. Ryan will answer it in our Monday Shorts. And Stephen, I'm feeling slightly Chekhovian.
Yes.
I don't know why, but I am.
All right, well, you're allowed to. Today, we're back where we've been before.
Yes.
And that is in the garden of Ruth and Barry Murphy, called Rosebery, in a little tiny settlement in Victoria called Piper's Creek. So last time we were here, we saw some fabulous plants and we decided we needed to come back again. And one of the main reasons I wanted to be in this garden again is to engage with some of Barry's oak collection. And
to say that Barry is an oak obsessive is an understatement.
Yes, I think obsessive is not quite the word for it even. He tells me he thinks he's got in excess of 100 different species of oaks and probably more than 700 oaks on the property all told.
Now, just to contextualize for people, how would you describe the climate here? So it does frost, it does get below 0 or 32 Fahrenheit.
Yes, it does get a bit of frost here. So some of the really tender oaks from the more tropical parts don't do well here. But I'd say it's generally speaking, quite a Mediterranean climate. So winter rainfall, summer dry, reasonably good soil, so the roots can get down, and it's in farming land, so the winds come through and all that sort of thing as well. And in general, the oaks have proved themselves to be splendid.
They have, and we're in a splendid example of it. So why don't we walk up this avenue and have a little chat about what Barry has done with this particular group of trees.
Good.
So, Stephen, I'm feeling Chekhovian because of the avenues, you know, slightly overgrown, slightly wistful. I feel like we're in the cherry orchard. People should waft about in linen.
Yeah, well, I get all of that. And in fact, Barry has planted these trees only 20 odd years ago.
Now, I just have to say, looking at these trees, I'm amazed that they're that young.
Yeah, they are. They're quite young.
And he said he grew them from acorns.
Oh, yes. Too. Yes, he collected the acorns locally, grew the seedlings, planted them out. They have made substantial trees in a very, very short time.
So what is the tree that we're looking at?
All right, well, they're Cork Oak.
Yep.
So Quercus suber, Mediterranean in origin. Because they're seedling raised, there's quite a bit of diversity in the genetics of these plants. So some of them have quite different leaf shapes, but they're all basically Cork Oaks. They love the climate here. And in fact, in a previous story we did here, we engaged with one Barry has in the garden that's over 100 years old. So.
Which he didn't grow from.
No, he didn't. He's not that old.
But now we're actually conveniently near a large trunk.
Yeah.
It's called the Cork Oak. It is the cork of commerce, is it not? Let's just have a little look at the trunk and talk about how that operates.
Yes, let's do that.
So firstly, 20 years old.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, look at the size of the caliper on that trunk. It's pretty impressive, I have to say.
Very happy tree. Now, the cork of commerce, I would have imagined it was spongy to the touch. This is not, it's actually hard. So how is cork harvested?
All right, well, this tree isn't old enough for a starter.
Right.
So the tree will need to get substantially older.
Yep.
And I've seen trees that have been harvested from in Spain, and they quite literally cut through the bark right back to the wood, and they peel the whole bark off all the way around the tree.
But that's ring barking.
Yeah, well, you would consider it ring barking.
Yeah.
But the cork oak has the capacity to regrow its bark again.
Goodness.
So you'll see these trees and they've just got nude trunks. I mean, it's just remarkable, and up to quite a high level. But once they've taken the bark off a cork oak, they have to leave it to regenerate for quite some years before they can go back and re-harvest again. So it's not an annual thing, it's more like a decade or so between harvestings.
And you said the tree's not old enough, so how old do they need to be?
Well, I'm not quite sure when they really start, but I would imagine they'd need to be at least 40 or 50 years old. They need to have a big biomass to get over the stresses of having their bark removed to be turned into corks for wine bottles and tiles for floors.
Yeah, interesting. And so what's the distribution of this tree?
Well, mainly in the Mediterranean basin, so and most of the cork is harvested in Portugal and Spain. I think there's some that is harvested in other parts of Europe, but it is basically a Spanish and Portuguese product.
But also, I mean, the bark is decoratively amazing too.
Yeah, it is. It's very handsome. And so the tree itself is beautiful. Of course, they're evergreen, so there's no dramatic change throughout the seasons. You don't have leaf fall or what have you, autumn colour and all that sort of thing. But they are very decorative and lovely trees. But I think I need to get Barry to do a little bit of lifting of some of the canopy to show off some of these trees, because they are now sort of flopping into the middle of the avenue and it's hard to actually get a sense of it. So yes, he needs to be a bit ruthless and lift up the bases of some of these trees.
But it is, I kind of like the looseness, and we've actually made a video about unusual avenues, and this certainly is one. And as a tree, fantastic for dry climates like ours.
Yep, well, when you consider it comes from Spain and Portugal.
Yeah.
So there you go.
All right, let's continue our journey.
Yes.
Now, Stephen, just a quick segue. We've just left the avenue of Cork Oaks and we're kind of in a glade of iris.
Yes, it's amazing. They're just this wonderful sort of informal patch of iris that are virtually naturalised.
And I think the thing about Ruth and Barry's garden is that it is, how would you describe it? It's not a garden, it's a collection of plants that are almost just left to their own devices.
Yeah, well, it's a sort of slightly wildling garden. And so I think Barry and Ruth tinker on the sort of edge of disaster with their garden. So one day it will all just fall down around them. At the moment, they're just holding on, and I think the garden's all the more romantic for that.
Well, it's very romantic, hence my Chekhovian moment. But this sort of patch of what are they? Bearded iris.
Bearded iris, yes. Yeah.
It's just gorgeous to see, kind of almost in the wild.
Yes, exactly.
All right, back to the oaks.
Yes, let's go and see some oaks.
Oh, Stephen, the colour of this one. But before we get into this one, let's go back to the basics. For those of us who do not know our oaks from our oaks, tell me, where is the genus found? Are there any in Australia, for example? Tell us all about oaks, Stephen.
All right. Well, at the moment, there's around about 470 accepted species.
Yep.
So it's a comparatively large genus.
Yeah.
There's also lots of hybrids. There are lots of selected forms, of which this is one, and their habitat ranges right through the whole northern hemisphere. So there's European oaks, there's North American oaks, and lots of Asian oaks. But they also extend down slightly into the southern hemisphere in South America, down into northern parts of South America. They also go down into Africa, so there's a few species that go into northern Africa, and they come right down the Malay Peninsula as well. So they sneak down into the southern hemisphere, a wee bit north of Australia, but they don't make it down to us.
So there are tropical ones then?
Basically, although I think most of the species that come from tropical countries tend to come from higher altitudes.
Right.
Although many oaks do extend down into tropical climes and go over the equator, they virtually all come from higher altitudes if they're in those countries. So they would still be classed as cool growing trees, not tropical trees per se. So as far as I know, there's no truly tropical oaks.
And yet, so just to clarify as well for Australian viewers, we have trees, the common names of which are, say, she oak in Australia, which is the casuarina. So the word oak has kind of been misused in Australia.
And in fact, it's been misused in lots of places, and it's often, you can lay the blame at people who cut down trees, because loggers saw timber as being similar, and so quite often the common name arose because of the qualities of the timber of the tree.
Because the casuarina, the Australian she oak, looks nothing like an oak, but its timber does. I'd never realised
Yeah,
that.
so that's where it comes from. A lot of the loggers and timber workers of the time would have said, oh, this is nice and silky and it looks a bit like oak, so let's call it silky oak.
Now, it's not a culture of blame on the Horti-Culturalists.
No.
So here we have an incredible tree. So what is this one?
All right. Well, this one is a golden leafed form of the red oak, which sounds like a bit of an oxymoron. And in fact, its botanical name is exactly the same thing. So it's Quercus rubra, which means red. And it's the cultivar Aurea, which means gold.
There you go. And where would this naturally be from?
Well, it's not a naturally found species. The rubra is, and it comes from North America, so it's one of the North American oaks, funnily enough in the red oak group. But this golden form of it probably arose in cultivation somewhere. And the tree we're standing in front of, which is quite a substantial tree already, Barry grew this from a seed, and it does come somewhat true to seed, so you'll get a percentage of golden seedlings most times. And he selected out some of his best seedlings. The parent plant, which is a grafted one, the parent plant has never produced a good dominant leader, so it's become sort of quite a broad, spready looking plant. But Barry's planted 3 seedlings around the garden, and they've all gone off like a rocket. They're fantastic. They've got good, strong leaders on them.
Yeah.
They're every bit as gold as the original parent plant, but you do have to cull through a lot of seedlings to find the good ones.
So what we're going to find out is that there is kind of an oak for everyone. I mean, other than the hot tropics, but in Mediterranean dry climates,
Yep.
in higher altitude cool, in cold climates,
Yep.
there's going to be an oak. And in Australia, a lot of oaks love it. I mean, Barry has got hundreds of different oaks from all over the world, and
Yep.
most of them looking pretty happy.
Yeah, he's got a few that are sort of struggling a wee bit, that
Yeah.
are borderline for here and
Yeah.
may or may never make a good tree in the garden. But certainly he's got oaks from fairly damp climates doing really well. He's got
Yeah.
oaks from very Mediterranean and dry climates doing really well. And most of them are growing far faster than people give oaks credit for.
Well, looking at that avenue of cork oaks that we just saw. So I guess too, the things that oaks can do, obviously, I mean, some of them are monumental and magnificent trees and some
Yeah.
are smaller. But one of the things too is spring foliage as
Yeah.
well as obviously autumn foliage.
Oh yes, well this Quercus rubra Aurea, for instance sake,
Yeah.
is stunning now.
Yeah.
It will go a sort of a pale green by midsummer, so it won't stand out to any great extent at that point of the year. But then in the autumn, it will come back to doing a wonderful colour again, but it won't
Right.
be yellow.
Yeah.
It'll go into the orangey reds.
Interesting. And oaks, I guess, obviously not, renowned for their flowers in terms of the flower, but the form of the flower can be quite dramatic
Oh
too.
yeah, yeah. Barry's got some fabulous ones here that when they're in flower with their lovely catkiny-like blooms on them, they can look absolutely stunning.
Now here's the thing, they're catkins. Are they wind pollinated or?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Having said that, though, they have got a lot of pollen in them, and although the main impetus by the trees is to be pollinated by the wind,
Yeah.
the insects enjoy the pollen from them. So a lot of the oaks, when they're in flower, they'll be buzzing quite literally with bees.
Oh, right.
So the insects will make use of the pollen, but generally speaking, most of it's wind pollinated.
All right, well, I think we should go and look at the next oak.
Yes.
Another oaky bower. Actually, that's all very Grecian, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oak, what were they? Oak glades.
Yes.
Where the gods and goddesses cavorted.
Yes, and it's probably where the Druids used to have their ceremonies as well, who
Yes.
knows. But yes, this one
Yeah.
is, I have to say, it's very pretty at the moment, but it's really only a collector's tree.
Okay.
And I'll explain
I was going
why.
to say, you're going to go down a dark path.
You
What's wrong with this tree?
Well,
Stephen?
let's explain what it is first.
Yeah.
It's Quercus robur Purpurea, the purple-leafed English
I'm going
oak.
to say purple.
Yeah, purple-leafed English oak.
And it is very purple.
And at this time of the year, it's quite lovely.
Yep.
It keeps its colour quite well into the summer, but then it tends to fade. And a lot of purple things, when they fade, they go sort of just a dirty browny sort of colour,
Not attractive.
and it gets worse.
Oh,
Because
but wait, there's more.
Yeah, in this climate, and I'm not sure about European and North American climates, but certainly in Australia, every tree I've ever seen of this by mid to late summer is also covered in mildew.
Right.
So you get this dreadful white mildewy stuff all over the leaves. So it wouldn't be a tree you'd want to have as your major specimen tree in the front lawn in front of the house, because it spends a fair bit of the year not looking overly attractive. And I have to say it's not overly vigorous either.
Well, okay, so there's a few crosses against
Yeah.
this one. Now, so where's it from? What's its native habitat?
Well, it's a purple version of the classical English oak. So when we say English oak here, we get scoffed a little bit when we go to places like Spain, Portugal, France, because the same oak shows up in all those places. So why the English get dibs on it, I'm not quite sure. And the same of the Irish strawberry tree. If you go to Spain and you say, oh look, there's an Arbutus unido, the Irish strawberry tree, they quite literally laugh at you.
Now, what is it about this climate? Is it the heat? Why does our climate make it mildew prone?
I don't know. I think the tree is just mildew prone anyway. And so, I mean, this gets quite dry in the summer. So in theory, you shouldn't get a lot of fungal diseases. But I think this tree just seems to welcome it in.
It's a mildew goddess.
Yes, exactly. But in the spring, the purple form of the English oak is truly quite a lovely tree. But I guess from the perspective of planting purple trees,
Yeah.
there are probably others that make much more garden-worthy trees, like copper beeches,
Yes.
things like that. They don't have all of the problems this purple oak has.
Yeah.
But as a collector's item, you rarely see it around. It's quite a rare tree. It's hardly ever available commercially in this country.
Yeah.
And so I guess the avaristic collector has to have one.
Well, only if you're an oak obsessive.
Yeah.
I must say, the contrast of the leaves with the because it's spring now, we're mid-spring, and that really bright green and the contrast of this colour, it's really beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Also, the lichen, the sort of goldy and pale grey lichen on the branch.
Yep.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, so nice in the winter when its leaves have all gone, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Barry and Ruth's garden is very romantic.
It is.
All right, let's find another romantic glade.
What a good idea. Well, Matthew.
Yes.
Another golden oak, but not the same as the first.
It's much smaller leaf.
Yes, this is a golden version of Quercus robur. So we've seen the purple version.
Yeah.
This is the gold version.
Now, do the gold ones suffer similar issues as the purple one?
Not to the same extent. You don't see the mildew on this very often, and if you do see it a little bit, because the leaves are gold and the mildew's white, it's not quite as obvious as mildew on purple leaves would be. So there may be something in the colour of the leaves that has to do with it.
Yeah.
So this one is generally sold as Quercus robur Concordia. Sometimes you'll see it just listed as Aurea. Again, it will also throw the occasional seedling that will be gold and sometimes every bit as good as the parent plant. This one is a grafted plant. It's not growing overly vigorously. I wonder whether it's in a little bit too exposed a spot, because the problem with gold foliage plants sometimes is too that they tend to burn more easily than the green versions when you get really hot sun in the summer. It may have been suffering a little bit from dryness in the summer, but Concordia is one of those must-have trees if you're a serious collector of oaks.
It's very beautiful. Now, of course, this is like the common English oak, isn't it? We obviously English in quote unquotes. So this is going to get to be a sizable tree.
Funnily enough, not as big as its green equivalent, because of course you've got to remember that anything that has a coloured foliage, it's masking.
Variegated.
Or variegated, yes, you're
It's
right.
going to be shriveled.
No, it's not. It's just going to be slower growing and potentially not as big growing as its straight green equivalent, because the foliage is some of the chlorophyll in the foliage is being masked, or in the case of variegated plants, destroyed. So of course the plant isn't as strong and vigorous. So it's unlikely to make a really big tree. I mean, I've seen a few golden oaks over the years that have been around 100 years or more, and they'd be a third the size of a normal green one.
Right, so that means then it actually could be applicable to a larger suburban garden.
Oh yes, yes.
You don't need a park for golden oaks.
No. In fact, I know there's one in Melbourne, not far from Melbourne University, in a very small front yard, and it's obviously been there for 50 or 60 years or more, and it's still not too big for the garden. So there you go.
There you go. Get out there and plant yourself a golden oak. Well, this one's beautiful. Now, you were talking, or you were reprimanding Barry, because here we see some very green shoots, Stephen.
Yes, unfortunately, because they're grafted, there's always the opportunity of the understock reshooting again, and in this case it has. And Barry did point it out to me in the first place, so he knows it's here. And I think he was using the excuse of, I left it there for you to film. You know,
well done, Barry.
I've used that sort of excuse myself, actually, but there you go.
And this is, it's kind of a sub-theme with grafted larger shrubs and trees, isn't it?
Yes. Normally speaking, though, the older the tree gets, the less likely it is to throw understock shoots.
Oh, okay.
Because the top has taken dominance and therefore it shades the base. You don't get so much air and light down there.
Right.
So the suckers tend to be less common in older trees. But this one's probably been in, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, and it's still showing evidence of suckering. So, and of course, if you do let them grow as big as this, when you remove them, they have a tendency to want to shoot back again. So, so Barry might have a little lifetime job to do here.
Okay, on to the next.
All right.
Well, this does not look like an oak, Stephen.
Well, this is our trifecta of Quercus roburs.
Ah.
So this, in fact, is the fern-leafed or cut-leaf version of Quercus robur.
Right.
Which is Variously sold as Pectinatus or laciniata.
Laciniata.
Cut, yes,
Yes.
lacinated, and it is a quite different looking oak. And this specimen of Barry's is getting up to a reasonable size now. Funnily enough, for a cut leaf version, which then would suggest less leaf area, so therefore less feeding potential for the tree, it's actually a comparatively vigorous selection. So it grows quite well, doesn't seem to suffer from the problems that you get with the purple and the gold one with regards to mildews and things. And I think it's a really pretty tree.
It really is. The leaf is extraordinary and very un-oak-like.
Yeah, and that's part of the charm, of course, because what is oak like?
Well, you know, everyone, the oak leaf. Anyway, how did this come to be, this particular form?
Goodness knows where it was actually discovered. It could have been in England or anywhere in Europe. And it's just an aberrant seedling. That
Right.
If you watch a batch of seedlings of oaks particularly, because they can be quite genetically various, it's surprising what
And
will show
promiscuous.
up. Oh, well, they can awfully promiscuous. I mean, most oaks that are related to each other reasonably closely. I mean, you don't often get a hybrid between an evergreen oak and a deciduous one, but certain groups within the oak genus, they will merrily cross-pollinate all over the place.
Which is one of Barry's points too about this garden, is there are so many oaks that with his seedlings, you can never be really sure what's coming up.
No, and I know from personal experience way back in the days of the Ash Wednesday bushfires at Mount Macedon in 1983, there were some botanists from the herbarium that came up to do some assessments in some of the gardens. And if they were going to have an argument about anything, it was always an oak. You know, oh, I think it's Quercus canariensis. Oh, I don't know. It looks like it's got some robur in it. You know, I can still hear these botanists arguing about whether it was a pure species or something, in fact, of hybrid origin. And of course, if it's growing in a collection like Barry's and like the oak lawn at the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, you certainly can't rely on the seedlings to be the same as the parent plant.
Well, this though is a fabulous find, whoever did find this aberrant form, and it's glorious.
It's a lovely tree, and it does give a nice fine lacy effect in a garden, which you don't generally expect from an oak.
And what about its autumn colour, do you think?
Not overly impressive, sort of yellowish, but you know,
Dead leafy.
Yeah, dead leafy. But its summer foliage is beautiful, and it makes a picturesque tree in time. So I think it more than makes up for that. But forms of the English oak are never really considered to be autumnally important.
All right, on to the next. Well, we're in one of Barry's sheep paddocks,
Yes.
where weirdly some of his rarer trees are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, of course, you do run out of room close to the house. So if you've got the space to keep moving outward and you have the tenacity to do so, well then, yeah, why not indeed?
And Barry really is. He's occupying each successive sheep paddock.
Well, I have to say he is protecting his trees from the sheep quite well. So he's putting in quite sturdy frames around them so that they'll be protected until they get well above sheep height. And this one caught my eye because I just thought the foliage was so beautiful.
Yeah.
And this is Quercus rugosa, which is one of the evergreen oaks, and it comes from Arizona through Texas to Guatemala and Honduras.
Oh, that's I was going to say a drier climate, but I guess parts of those other countries can be slightly drier too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a beautiful oak. It's obviously not fast growing. I've no idea how old this one is.
It looks happy.
It's happy, it's healthy. And rugosa means rough, and it has a rough,
like sandpaper.
fissured leaves.
Not that rough.
No, not that rough. And I think it's a really handsome oak. And when its foliage first comes out, we're probably a week or two too late. It's almost a burgundy red when the new growth is coming out.
And Barry's given me a picture, which I'm dropping in now, and it almost looks like a flower. It's so striking.
Yeah, so wonderful oak. Very rarely seen here in Australia. So I'm quite excited to sort of stumble across it in the sheep paddock.
But I'd imagine it's a tree that's going to love our conditions.
Oh, it should be fine here. I mean, it certainly looks robustly healthy, albeit slowish growing, but I think that's basically the nature of the beast.
There you go. Onwards and upwards.
Yes, let's go and find another one.
Yowza.
Yes.
Tell me this is an oak, Stephen.
It isn't.
This is an oak story.
Yeah, it is an oak story, but I couldn't quite walk past this one without engaging with it.
Yeah.
It is an oak relative. It's a Castanopsis, Castanopsis sclerophylla, and it comes from southern China, and it produces these quite long racemes of tiny little flowers in amongst the new growth, which are really pretty. It does produce an acorn type fruit, so it looks somewhat oak-like when it goes to fruit.
Yeah.
It's an evergreen, slowish growing, but eventually a small to medium tree, and it's something that you rarely, if ever, see grown here in Australia. And I don't really know how common it is in horticulture elsewhere, so it's rather fun to get to engage with a plant like this.
So southern China,
Yep.
it's evergreen, so obviously it's from a more temperate climate.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this probably wouldn't grow in the coldest parts of Europe and North America, but I'd bet money on it being able to be grown quite well in California, probably up as far as Oregon and across onto the east coast a little bit further south. It may well grow, and because it does come from that sort of southern Chinese bit, it may even cope with summer humidity, so it might even go down into the subtropics.
Wow. Well, it's the combination of the flowers and this sort of almost like lacquered golden green new foliage. It's stunning.
It is. It's a beautiful little tree, and I rather lust after having one now. So I'll have to talk to Barry and find out whether it sets any seed or not, because I would like to grow some.
Well, ask him nicely, Steve.
I will ask him very nicely.
We'll exit through the gift shop.
Yes, why not indeed?
Another oak that's not an oak. Well, it doesn't look like an oak.
Yeah, no, it doesn't look like an oak. This is one of the evergreen Asian species, the Japanese evergreen oak, Quercus acuta. And at the moment, it looks like a very well-grown shrub.
Yes.
And Barry tells me that it's not particularly old, and it's pushed itself up to nearly 3 metres tall, and I reckon it's about 4 metres wide.
Yeah.
And it's an evergreen, so it doesn't do autumn colour or anything. But the thing I like about it is when you touch the new growth, it's like velvet.
Ooh, yeah.
It's got this wonderful, soft, tactile feel to it. It's got a sort of a furriness about the new growth. And I think it's a rather charming plant. Probably not one of those things that you would recommend to every home gardener.
Not going to set the world on fire.
No, because
dare I say?
Yeah, no, it's not showy and colourful. It's an oak with a very un-oak-like character, and it does add a little bit of interest to our story to show people just what this genus has to offer. But I'd be very happy to have some of this particular species, I have to say.
So obviously evergreen, once again, it comes from the more temperate parts.
Yeah, so Japan, parts of China, Taiwan, so through that sort of part of Asia. And it obviously is hardy enough to cope with a comparatively dry summer that we can throw at them in Australia.
And a little bit of frost that they get here.
And yeah, it wouldn't be enough to damage the tree, so it will cope with quite a bit, I think.
Great. Interesting thing. On to the next. Oh, Stephen, an oak epic.
Exactly. And really, when you think about it, we've only just scratched the surface.
Well, we have, because Barry has how many different trees?
Well, there's well over, he thinks, 100 different oaks in the garden, including hybrids and other sundry things, and over 700 trees all up.
So we have literally scratched the surface with this handful that we've looked at today, but what an amazing and diverse group of trees, and some things I would never have in a million years thought were an oak. I grew up in England. My version of the oak is just the classic English, the English oak with that shaped leaf. To me, that's an oak. So it's always so fascinating to see that they grow too in quite dry climates.
Oh yes, many of them do. And of course, you know, you can have a classic sense of a group of plants, but when you really see a big group like, you know, the 470 odd different oaks there are out there, of course they're all going to have to be slightly different. The thing that gives oaks away though, of course, is when they get big enough to fruit, they invariably have an acorn.
Well, there you go. We didn't see any acorns because it's not that time of year, but before we go, we should just mention this avenue. So we began at an avenue that Barry planted from seed less than 20 years ago, and this he planted from seed in the year 2000.
Yeah, so
25 years ago.
Yeah, not that far back. And these are all pin oaks, so these are Quercus palustris, and this is, I think, the tradesman's entrance or the back door to go out of the property.
This is where we left last time, out through the back way.
Yes, exactly. So it is a lovely young avenue, and I would like to be around in another 20 or 30 years to see it starting to get up there and be a really serious avenue of pin oak.
But I think too, the point about this is that a lot of oaks are relatively fast growing, aren't they?
They are. And of course, everything seems to have gone fast in hindsight. So if you're looking forward 20 years and you think, oh, I can't possibly be around in 20 years to see this grown, once you get to that 20th year, you go, oh, that went very fast, did it not? So yeah, plant them and enjoy them.
And is it true to say that many sort of more temperate climate trees do grow faster in Australia because of there's more sunlight and warmth and rain?
Yeah, and our seasons tend to be a little longer and the winter's not so severe. And I think the issue or the interesting thing, perhaps not the issue, but the interesting thing will be, are the trees going to grow faster but live as long and therefore become huge?
Die young,
Or
live hard and die young.
Yeah, well, that sounds like an Australian thing to say, isn't it? So we don't really know because horticulture in Australia has only been going for a couple of 100 years. I've had English friends look at oak trees in some of our big gardens on Mount Macedon that would probably be no more than 120, 130 years old and say, wow, that's an amazing 300-year-old oak. So well, there you go.
It's not. Well, many, many thanks, Barry and Ruth, who let us wander around and fed us the most delicious lunch and scones. So
yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it's been a very nice day and I've enjoyed thoroughly this little dive into the genus Quercus.
The Chekhovian wander through this. It's a very wild and romantic landscape. And actually, is this garden ever open? Is it part of the open garden program?
It has been, and it also opens most years. I don't know whether they'll keep doing it for much longer, but for the local Kyneton Daffodil Festival, they have a whole range of gardens open in the early spring, which obviously have to be gardens that feature daffodils. And I know that Ruth and Barry have had the garden open for that as well.
There you go. So if you're in the district, it might be something worth looking at. We'll put the open garden schedule down below in the link, so you can always have a look to see what gardens are open and see if this one ever pops up.
Yep, exactly.
And what might pop up next week is us, if you subscribe, because we post every week on a Friday.
And don't forget, you're bound to have a burning horticultural question that you need to ask me. So put that in the comments below, give me a sense of where you're from for context, and we will answer those in our Monday shorts.
But in the meantime, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.